Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Christopher Riepel. I am the Neil Westreich Curator of Post-1800 Paintings here at the National Gallery, and curator of the exhibition that opened today and that you will have seen or will be seeing, Sorolla, Spanish Master of Light. It is an exhibition we've been working on for approximately 3 years, myself most closely with my colleague Akimi Jerez Fosbrink, who is our curatorial fellow in Spanish art and who has done inestimable service in moving the exhibition forward and indeed in ensuring that every communication between London and Madrid was perfectly understood in both directions. And so much of the credit for a very happy collaboration goes to Akimi. We have also had the joy, the pleasure, the honor to work with Blanca Pons Sorolla, the great-granddaughter of the artist Joaquin Sorolla, and the author of the catalog Raisonné, the first volume of which will be published in the next few months. Blanca very much is the person who knows where everything is, knows how everything fits, and her help in bringing together the first exhibition of Sorolla in London since 1908, so few of us remember it, and to re-ask the question of where does this extraordinary artist fit in the development of modern painting. You see him here in his self-portrait of 1908. He was born in 1863 in Valencia, the beautiful old city on the east coast of Spain. He is orphaned at 2 and is raised by an aunt and uncle, the aunt in particular being very, coming to recognize very quickly that he had particular talents in drawing, in art, was very drawn to visual things, and with providing him the means, even as simple as pencil and paper, for him to begin to explore this interest of him. He then is well trained in Valencia and later in Madrid, and what comes clearly to the fore very early is an extraordinary technical ability. Very soon, and you will see it in so many of the pictures we look at, he fulfills a potential to basically do anything he wants, evoke anything he sets his mind to with paint on canvas. You see him here, as I say, in a self-portrait, but also in an earlier photograph, and I will keep coming back to the role that photography plays in his art. A younger man there, but I think the thing that unites these two works is the intensity of his gaze, the intensity with which he stares out at the world. And it will be very important for Sorolla in defining his aesthetic that he only paints what he sees, that his is a recording eye, and that we should have perfect trust in the veracity of what he is presenting to us. That comes very early in the career. He is allied with his extraordinary technique, developing so quickly, is an extraordinary ambition. He wants to be a successful artist, but he does not want to be a successful artist only in Spain. Very early on, he decides he wants to be famous across Europe, he wants to be famous in America, he wants to be famous around the world. And his first most very active decade of artistic activity, the 1890s, sees him plotting how he is going to do this. And the way he determines, he was not the only one to have realized this way, is to paint big, ambitious paintings on modern themes of social life that he will then send across Europe to America, indeed, to the great exhibitions and world's fairs of the day, where they will be seen, where they will attract attention. This picture of 1892, another Marguerite. The subject derives from Goethe. At least in Goethe's Faust, Marguerite has killed her child. Sorolla saw this scene. He saw a woman being taken to prison, and when he inquired as to what she had done, was told that she had killed her child. And the reference to Goethe, to Faust, to Gounod's opera perhaps, only comes later. He sees the connection. But what he wants us to know is that he actually saw this, and this is based on experience. He also tells us that he saw her in a crowd, in a train station with many, many other people milling around. But he is an artist, and so what he begins to do, and is doing even at this point, is editing away everything inessential. Seeing her and the two civil guards alone who are responsible for taking her away. We see the shackles on her hands, her few poor possessions. So he has edited down and made extremely distinct and memorable this image of suffering and despair. Now, this picture is shown in Madrid, receives great renown, but perhaps most importantly, it is then sent to Chicago for the great World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, the great celebration of the discovery of America by Columbus. And it is the first picture by Sorolla to be seen in America. It has remained there ever since in various American collections. And I will come back to the extraordinary role that America and American love for Sorolla would play in his career. Similarly, this picture, the first of his works to be bought by the Spanish state, and they still say fish is expensive. A young fisherman has been badly injured. Here we see him below deck with older figures attending him. He is very much like a Christ figure who has been being treated by Joseph Arimathea, as it were, after he's taken down from the cross. But this too is the sort of event from which he realized he could make entirely memorable pictures. And as I say, the first to be acquired by Spain itself. This enormous work goes as early as 1895 to Paris, where it is shown in the Paris Salon and immediately bought by the French state for the Musée du Luxembourg and now in the Musée d'Orsay. Excuse me. It shows Valencian fishermen at the end of the day, their boat laden down with fish. And so they need to go out and bring oxen out to actually pull the boat up onto shore. That is what we see here. The oxen were actually kept on the beach for this purpose. But he paints them, excuse me, he paints them, the oxen are life-size. We are thrown into the middle of this scene of specifically Spanish labor in the sea. And we see him in the way in which he paints water, and specifically that moment where water and sky meld together, the technical dexterity he brings to bear in creating an envelope of environment that is absolutely convincing to us. So he is amazing the world, if you will, as he sends these pictures around Europe and America. Nowhere more so than in this also huge picture, Sewing the Sail, a Valencian fisherman's family, their house near the sea. You see the door open to it, and all the family merrily gathered to sew the sail for the fisherman's boat from which they will win their livelihood. It is a symphony in white up here of the sail. It is sometimes that when you first see it, You have to work a bit to figure out what you're seeing, but it soon falls into place. This picture travels across Europe and wins awards, and finally, in 1905, is sent to the Venice Biennale and is bought right out of the Venice Biennale by the city of Venice itself, where it remains. And finally, perhaps the most astonishing of these early works with which Sorolla established world reputation is Sad Inheritance. Disabled, blind, deaf young boys are being led down to the sea here to bathe by the monks who take care of them. They look, it is an image. Again, Sorolla insisted that he saw this. There are many, many preparatory studies for this made on site. He said it was a very beautiful scene and a very sad scene, and he could never possibly do anything like it again. The picture was sent, in this case, to the 1900 Paris Universal Exposition, where it wins the gold medal and elicits huge discussion for the picture. It is, I think, somewhat troubling today for many people, but I would point out that the picture then very quickly goes to America and hangs for some 80 years in a church on Fifth Avenue in New York, basically as an altarpiece, basically as a statement, the representation of an act of charity. Will take care of the ill. It remains a shocking picture, an overwhelming picture, and I would point out to those of you who've seen the exhibition or will be seeing it, that this is the first time that all of these great pictures of the 90s with which Sorolla established his reputation have been brought together in a single room. So we really see, in a way as never before, a decisive moment in his career that will soon change. By 1900, by the late 19th century, in fact, he is happily married. He marries Clotilda, the daughter of a photographer, the first man who ever employed him. He employed the young Sorolla, and I suppose it's quite indicative of what was to come. He employed Sorolla to do his lighting. And so for a painter for whom light would be so important, one can only imagine that it was extraordinarily worthwhile training. But anyway, he marries Clotilda. It was a hugely happy marriage. It was a hugely happy family life with 3 children. It's what writers call the biographer's curse. And here we have one of the most compelling of those images showing Clotilda with the daughter Elena. Born in 1895, he shows mother and daughter in bed. Originally, he had shown Clotilda's head turned away from the baby within this sea of white of the sheets of the walls. But around 1900, he decides to rethink that. He's learning more and more how to add pathos, tenderness into his paintings. And so what he simply does is to repaint her head, turned now to face the little baby, and this almost electric charge between mother and child is set up. It is a wonderfully tender and sweet image, and one that many of you will, of course, recognize. Owes a clear debt to Whistler. He's really been looking at Whistler and how you do all white, all silvery paintings in this. And this is another characteristic we will see. He watches very closely what's going on in international modern art. He is also keenly dedicated to the idea of himself as participating in a grand Spanish tradition. In 1902, he comes to this country. He comes with the artist and art historian Berruete, who was at that point writing what would be the first great modern monograph on Velázquez. And they go up to see the Rokeby Venus. The Rokeby Venus had not yet come to the National Gallery. It was still in Rokeby Hall in Yorkshire. They go up there. Berruetti makes his notes, as it were, for his book. And Sorolla studies the picture intensely and immediately realizes that he can make he can take on Velázquez, if you will, and using Clotilde as his model, paint this extraordinary nude figure of her on these pink satin sheets. It is a symphony of light playing across luxurious fabrics, and of course playing down the spine of her back as well. Of course, he never showed this painting in his lifetime, identifying it as his wife. It is, when he first shows it in London in 1908, he simply calls it Gypsy, and then female nude or whatever. On the other hand, he never sold it, and it remains one of the most compelling of the family images you will see in the show. Here are the three children. Maria con Mantilla, it's in fact based on a Goya portrait, based on a Duchess of Alba portrait that we had here at the gallery only a few years ago. And Elena in this wonderful, rather chic yellow dress, and the son Joachim, who had spent a lot of time in England, studied in England, and who was presented as a sort of restrained, subdued English gentleman. But these figures will appear over and over again. He also, as the money began to come in, and it did, he also built for them an extraordinary house in what was then the suburb of Madrid, is now dead center, and is now the Museo Sorolla. And you see on the left the studio in the house, and many of the paintings you'll see were actually painted in this studio. The house was sort of then beyond that, and it was wrapped around a series of very beautiful gardens, 3 gardens actually, one of which you see here, which allowed him endless variety in painting scenes, garden scenes, scenes of light and foliage, that you will see a number of them in the exhibition as well. He designed the house himself. He had a very specific idea of how to continue that Spanish architectural tradition of indoors moving into outdoors, an easy flow between the two, something that one wants to do in hot climates. As I say, with the nude that we saw, I introduced the idea that Sorolla was particularly concerned with his place within the Spanish tradition. He thought of himself as continuing that tradition, and all of the critics were also telling him that he was the man who, more than any other, was pushing a specific Spanish tradition of naturalistic painting in which light plays a key role, and which psychological presence, particularly in portraits, is very important. So here from the Prado you have this truly remarkable Velázquez-like, Goya-like portrait of the painter Aureliano de Berruete, the man with whom he traveled to Rokeby Hall to see the Velázquez, a kind of symphony in black, as that head turns from darkness into light and confronts us with a deeply penetrating gaze. Similarly, we have this, Ralph Clarkson, an American painter, a Chicago painter. There is a very large exhibition of Sorolla in Chicago, and I will come back to the American thing in a bit. He goes to Chicago. He is received as a prince of painting in Chicago, makes many, many friends, is very touched by how he's received. And one of them is Ralph Clarkson, a painter who loves Spanish art. We see Clarkson here in front of one of his copies of a Velázquez Menina. of a Velasquez princess. He dedicates the portrait to him, and he also elsewhere tells us that he painted this in 2 hours. And this is very important because famously, Velasquez often painted his portraits, or the heads, the expressive parts of them, within 2 hours. It was a point of honor, if you will, I suppose, that you had to capture the spirit, the vivacity of another human being by doing it very, very quickly. You could not labor over it, or the spontaneity would be lost. And so in a picture like this, you specifically have Sorolla seeing if he can't compete with the great Velasquez himself. Here he is turning to back to his wife, to Clotilde, impossibly thin Clotilde, in this black dress, a painting of 1906, which is acquired, you see, by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in 1909. Now, as I said, the last exhibition of Sorolla in London is 1908. It is not a particular success. Not many are sold. Commissions don't come out of it. But he does meet his most important patron. And that is a man named Archer Milton Huntington. Huntington's father had built the railroad to the Pacific. It was a hugely wealthy family, and Archer, wanting to establish his own place in the world of American philanthropy, had in 1904 founded an extraordinary institution known as the Hispanic Society of America. It remains in Upper Manhattan, way up Broadway at 165th Street. And this was Huntington's great project. He had heard about Sorolla. He comes to London in 1908 to see the Sorolla exhibition here, which was at the Grafton Galleries in Grafton Street. He buys any number of pictures by Sorolla out of that exhibition. And most importantly, through Sorolla's agent, invites him to do an exhibition the following year in New York at the Hispanic Society. As I say, the London exhibition was not a particular success for the artist. The New York exhibition a year later was a sensation. They were lined up around the block in the snow to get in to see these paintings. It was a selling exhibition. 195 paintings sell. He receives 25 portrait commissions. He even receives the ultimate American portrait commission. He's invited to the White House to paint the president, Taft at that point. And as you see, he becomes a sensation for the new museums of America. They all have to have their Sorolla. And as I say, it is in that very year that the Met acquires this very Hispanic-looking portrait of Clotilde out of the Hispanic Society exhibition. So his fame, he also, when you sell 195 paintings, he comes back to Europe a very wealthy man. Here's another portrait of the children. Certainly he is conscious of Sargent painting here in London. Sargent, a very amiable man, and in fact they were quite close friends and friendly competitors, because even at this point in time, in the early 19th century, critics were constantly comparing Sargent and Sorolla. But then what he knew, even before 1909, he leaves London early in 1908 because his show is not a particular success, and he says, I am going back to Valencia to paint beach scenes for America, because he knows that the scenes of light, of color, of children, of people enjoying themselves on the beach would prove to be a huge hit there, as indeed they were. This is arguably, this not from America, but from the Prado, arguably the most famous of all Sorolla paintings, the boys on the beach, these little innocent children enjoying themselves in the waves. Again, we have photographs, and already by this point, Sorolla was having himself constantly photographed as he painted, as a kind of demonstration of the veracity of what he was doing, to prove to you that I was there, I saw this is my record of actuality. This is not the photograph of for the previous picture, but he's painting, you see, children on the beach. He's there dressed up, hat, tie, the whole thing, but in the sand, painting there right in front of the motif he had chosen. And we will see how he carries that notion of authenticity even further. Here's another of these scenes, the white boat, in which his extraordinary ability to capture water, to capture light on water, and then to capture what happens to images, to bodies in this case, when the light is refracted by the water, etc. So you have this rather frog-like boy in the foreground of the picture. Or here, a picture I particularly admire, coming from a private collection in Mexico City, a kind of symphony of opalescent colors of this little boy carrying fish home at the end of the day, full of silvers and subtle pinks and mauves. And of course, what you see is the whole composition, the whole color symphony of the composition is based on the silvery color of the fish. He just sort of brilliantly carries it around to unify the whole composition that is in front of him. He was always very conscious, as he worked, of traditions beyond Spain. We've seen him looking at the Spanish tradition. We've seen him looking at contemporary artists. But he was also deeply, deeply interested in ancient Greek sculpture. And very often some of these scenes, and he himself said this is his greatest painting, very often in these scenes of, say, a woman who's just come out of the sea and is being dressed after her bath, the light streaming into the little pavilion, little lean-to where they are, has the grandeur, the stature, and it's a very large picture, the grandeur, the stature of ancient Greek sculpture. It has a kind of permanence and dignity worthy of Greek sculpture. And we know that in this, another of the most famous of Sorolla's pictures from 1908, one of these pictures he painted to bring to America, that the visit to London was very important because he goes to the British Museum to study the Elgin marbles. And this, again, is a kind of gloss on the friezes of the Elgin marbles, the wonderful running figures that he sees there. So that sense of a higher purpose, a higher reference at work in the pictures is ongoing in his paintings. He also becomes ever more audacious in these years at painting light, and particularly light on water, to the extent that the dazzling effects he achieves in certain cases even seem to overwhelm what he is depicting in this scene of fishermen dragging their boat up onto the shore, the orange rocks, the blue water, and the intersection of the colors in the reflections on the water. Or in this, where form is almost dissolved, so intense is the brilliance of the sunlight, probably toward the end of day, I would suspect, this sunlight perhaps bouncing off water and dissolving these forms. But he himself tells us exactly where he is. He is under this umbrella, shading himself so he can witness what the light does to the little children out there in the water. Now, I mentioned Archer Huntington and the Hispanic Society of America. In 1910, Huntington and Sorolla meet again in Paris this time, and Huntington begins to elaborate a proposal to Sorolla for what would be, I believe, the largest painting commission ever given in America to a foreign artist. Huntington proposes that Sorolla paint a mural around the walls of the library of the Hispanic Society, 210 square meters of paint, a huge commission. What we have here is an early proposal by Sorolla for how that might look. And what he is proposing is that they be very large pictures, really from floor to ceiling, on the regions of Spain, on the various provinces of Spain, and that they be very, very, very closely jammed together so that you would be surrounded by these pictures, so that it would be like you were in the middle of a panorama of the people of Spain, the events of Spain, the activities of the Spanish, their customs, their ways of life. And I show you what the finished work looks like. The Hispanic Society is undergoing a renovation, and these paintings are at the moment boarded into the walls as work goes on. But when the Hispanic Society reopens, you can go in and see these for free, and it is one of the wonders of America. So he is given this commission. He elaborates with Huntington what it's going to be like, and then in 11 and 12, really, he sets to work, and it will be the work of the rest of his life. Though he paints many other pictures, but always what he would call his vision of Spain would be in the forefront of his thinking, of his creativity. In order to take it on, in order to start, as we've seen for the previous 10 years, really the first decade of the 20th century, he had been painting those light-filled, brilliantly, brightly toned pictures of beaches, of pleasurable scenes near the water, of happy thoughts, if you will. And he realizes he has to get back to where he had been before in the 90s, painting more of, confronting more the peasant life of Spain, the places in Spain where the old traditions still lived on. And at the same time, he had to get back to a dark palette because black plays such a huge role in Spanish painting. And he goes about 1910, 11, and does a whole series of these tavern scenes, these dark but not humorless pictures of working men, fishermen, whatever, enjoying themselves, perhaps enjoying themselves a bit too much, at the end of the day, addressing Sorolla as he visits them in the towers. So these works, and we have this picture in the exhibition, show him, if you will, revving up to take on the vision of Spain for Huntington. And as I say, the vision of Spain itself in New York is not available for loan. So what we decided to do was show these very large studies, which are the first step in preparing to paint the murals in New York, where he travels across Spain week after week, month after month, often in the company of many assistants, often in the company of photographers, posing peasants in their local costumes. He is regretting all the time how the old traditions are fading away, how it's hard to find people who carry on in the old way anymore. Sometimes he He even has to bring the costumes himself and ask the peasants to pose in them because they don't wear them anymore. But paints these life-size pictures of the people standing there just addressing him in some way. This, we're in Roncal. We know that the man on the right is a city alderman or something like that. The others in the local costumes, or in these two, Salamanca, this woman on the left dressed as a bride in a very large, very heavy, no doubt, dress bedecked with jewelry, her groom standing beside her, looking rather implacably out at us, similarly in the far picture. But it's very interesting what he then does with these figures. If we look at this girl, she, as I say, implacable, she's standing there rather frozen. She's not, if you will, performing for Sorolla. She doesn't know what this man is doing. She's almost certainly never posed for a portrait before. But we see in the final thing how, having done this very large image, he then uses her in the finished work. And you see, there she is, now participating in a big civic pageant, is the pageant of the bread, the loaves of bread. She's carrying a loaves of bread. She's now quite animated. She's giving us a sort of coy look. So this is the process that these studies go through from the time that Sorolla views these people in their natural habitat and then turns them into these gigantic murals for New York. He is also, it is very important for him, and I've stressed this point, that his works be seen as authentic. And so he paints almost always out of doors. He is very important to do landscapes and capture the light, capture the atmosphere of various parts of Spain, so that these can then be worked into the big paintings, and you can, as I say, believe the authenticity of what he's showing you. Here he is in Burgos, painting the cathedral under snow. Again, a photograph shows him out there in the snow. Very important to have been there, to have actually experienced this thing. We see him also becoming more and more experimental, or posing even visual problems for us, where we really have to work to figure out what it is we're seeing. And we're not quite sure when we look at this, but then we realize that when we see the title, we're at the edge of a bridge. It's a great stone bridge. Here is the arch of the bridge. Here is the reflection of the light under the arch lying on the water. So you have an almost abstract form applied to the landscape, but as soon as you realize that, it almost snaps into place, and you realize the validity of the image Sorolla has painted. And of course, the freedom of paint application is becoming ever and ever greater in these works. As I say, Akimi and I laugh. We wait for the first person who tells us we've hung it upside down. Because, of course, the only real thing in the picture is this very thin band across the top. All the rest of the picture of this fountain at the Alcazar, of this pool of water, is the reflection in the water, the reflection of the fountain, the small rivulets coming out as the water trickles in. It is almost entirely a picture of a reflection, but absolutely authentic to visual experience. Or in this work, Smugglers of 1919, he is still at work on the vision of Spain. He had told Huntington that it would be already in 1915. It's 4 years later. He's still not there. But he is continuing to paint very audacious images, such as this painting of smugglers. Again, photographs show what it was like in that Sorolla, is actually standing on top of a cliff, looking straight down into the water. It's on Ibiza. And looking at these smugglers scrambling up the water with their contraband on their back. He painted it for Fortune Ryan, an American, a New York plutocrat who'd made his fortune in tobacco. So I kind of wonder if maybe the contraband is tobacco. But what is fascinating is that painting this, getting this vertiginous view, at a certain point, Sorolla decides that it would be much more interesting to have these figures off-center, to have them askew, to have less of a formal arrangement. And I don't know if you can see here is a seam where he has brought a second canvas in and sewed it to the first so that he can show the whole right third of the picture is completely empty except for stone and rock. And as I say, it has a truly startling effect in intensifying the sense that we're about to fall off a cliff, that we're unsteady, we're in some kind of peril here. It is an extraordinary picture and extraordinarily freely painted. Also, in these years that he's going to be working on the vision of Spain, he returns to that favorite topic, which is his own family. And they become more and more a constant presence in his art in what are often very large-scale paintings. Paintings that it would be hard to think how a normal collector in a normal-sized house could ever use them, because they're 10 and 12 feet high, as is this picture of Clotilda and daughter strolling along the seashore. A wonderful image of a certain kind of early 20th century chic. These wonderful white summer dresses, the veils, the hats, or even more striking from a few years later, the siesta. Again, it's a picture, very large picture, very simple in what it depicts, but again, a picture that is sometimes a bit difficult to figure out at first what we're looking at until it sort of pops and you realize in this incredible free play of paint that he is looking down on Clotilda, the two daughters and a friend, a hot Spanish summer afternoon, and they're having their siesta. And there are these white blobs in the brilliant green grass, sunlight, but they have situated themselves in the shade. It is from a distance almost like an abstract painting, almost like an abstraction, one might even say, of the 50s, that then, as I say, snaps into place, and we understand how true it is to perception and to what light can do to form in nature. And then from the same years, again, a daughter skipping, a picture that we now know was actually shown at the Liverpool Festival in 1909. It showed a daughter in the garden. It is a picture, I think, that has something to do with photography, and that before photography it would be hard to think of someone understanding that they could paint a figure in midair, unsupported. You see the skipping rope, and you see extraordinarily like a spider or something, her shadow cast on the ground. It really does require the snapshot aesthetic to exist, and it did now because little Kodak cameras were now available. The snapshot aesthetic that allows images like this to enter our visual imagination. The execution of the vision of Spain practically kills Sorolla. He works on it so with great difficulty, intensity, constant travel, constant working on a very large scale from 1910 to 1920, when he has a very serious stroke. He never really paints again. That is the end of the career. The stroke, happily, comes when he is at home. And we have this extraordinary image right from the end. It must be one of the last paintings, and it has an elegiac quality to it, in that it is the garden of the house that he's built for his family, one of the 3 gardens in which he very, very often painted. And there is the chair in which he often sat as he painted. Indeed, as you go into the exhibition, you see a gigantic blow-up of a photograph of him painting in the garden and sitting in that chair. But now it is empty. It's over. As I say, it's as if he is foreseeing his own end and the end of this delightful world he has built for his family, and of the great project he had undertaken. He dies in 1923. The Vision of Spain is only installed in New York in 1926, at which point the world had moved on, at which point it was greeted with almost indifference. It seemed to be news from yesterday, as it were. And that accounts, I think, somehow, when you thought, by 1926, when you thought of Spanish modern art, you thought of Picasso, you thought of Dali, you thought of Miro, not any longer of Sorolla, I think. And so one of the questions we're asking now, all of these years later, in 2019, is after all of these decades of not paying attention to Sorolla, ought we to reconsider him? What aspects of this great achievement are the most important? Where should we now fit him into a more complicated story of the development of modern art than we perhaps have been looking for? And we really must thank our Spanish colleagues and friends for insisting now for many decades that he is a very great artist who must be given his due, whom attention must be paid to, and that is what I hope we were doing. And we were, of course, very lucky to have the Queen come and open the exhibition for us last week, and herself insist this is one of the great wonders of Spain. Thank you very much.